Hi, alright folks, welcome back to Glasgow News. Yeah, you're right, it's been some time since I've had any content. Various reasons for that, mainly work related to be honest. Not having the time. Well, however, why now? Well, like yourselves, over the last several months, I've been subjected, like you've been subjected, to the mass hysteria and propaganda surrounding this country here, Ukraine. And I've decided to have a discussion about recent events. Alright? And these recent events, I'm going to have a couple of videos on it. And I'm going to try and use this map here. Because when you can see the places we're talking about, it helps a lot. People talk about, Ukraine, Belarus. They talk about, the Donbass, the different areas, Lugansk, Donetsk People's Republics in Ukraine. They talk about Crimea and the things that have been done there and all the rest of it. But what you've got to understand, there's a lot of history here. And the mainstream media don't deal in history, they deal in sound bites. The Russians done it. That seems to be the most common soundbite, and it's been that way for an awful long time. But just to try and illustrate why, I'm going to quickly show you something. So just take a look at the map. You can see the UK here. All right, this is where we live. I live up here where that star is. That's my house there, that star. It isn't actually. It says for some reason it's linking me to Ashfield Street, which is straight. This is Google Maps, and it's also linking me to, what's that there? An Esso station in Newcastle. God knows why, but anyway. So it's good to look at the map now. The first thing to look at is all the countries of Western Europe. All right, Spain, Italy. There's Paris, there's Madrid, there's Berlin, and there's all your various other countries, the Czech countries, Slovakia, Moldova, Hungary, Romania, Croatia, Serbia, Bulgaria, and there's Greece down there at the bottom. And then you've got Ukraine, and the capital of Ukraine is Kiev. Alright? So you don't notice that Kiev is very close to the territory of Belarus, and that's why you were getting, while there was some Russian military exercises taking place here, you were getting people in the mainstream media saying, well, they're going to put tanks right through to Kiev. Well, basically, that's the sort of war games they practice. Because, just a little bit of history, when Napoleon marched on Moscow, he did so through the Ukraine and what is known as Poland, parts of Poland and Belarus, right? When Germany took over Poland and all these countries fell to Germany, this was the whole of Germany here, right, except Ukraine. So this was all German territory. And they were over here as well, Denmark, the Netherlands. They took over the whole of France, didn't they? They took over Italy. This was all Greater Germany. They launched Operation Barbarossa right through Ukraine. So it kind of tells you that in the minds of the Russians, this particular territory here is a gateway in. Belarus is still aligned with Russia, but the Ukraine, thanks to an American intelligence-led coup d'etat in 2014, is now, I would call them a rogue state, right? Potential rogue state, full of corruption, oligarchs stealing all the money, right? So that's the general picture. But why all the hostility to Russia? Well, I want you to look at this. Everything from this line here all the way over here is Russia. Now, look at the size of everything in Europe. You could fold that into Russia 4, maybe 5 times. The resources available to the Russian Federation and the peoples of Russia have been coveted by the West for millennia. Right? Hundreds of years they've coveted it. All your money families, the old money, all the banks, they want Russia. They don't just want Moscow, right? They want all the resources of Russia. Now, coming back to the wee bit of history I want to talk about, and in today's video I want to talk specifically about this little part here. And you've heard of that little part in the news in 2014 in particular, and that's because this part here is a peninsula, because it juts into the sea. Do you see it? That's why they call it a peninsula. That's the Crimea. Right, now that particular piece of land, think about it, it's not that big, right? It's a lot of history there. What do I mean? Well, let's look at recent history. People were all screaming that when the Ukrainian coup took place, the Russians came over and they annexed this. In other words, they took over that. Well, why would they do that? Well, because the Black Sea Fleet, the Russian Black Sea Fleet, is based in this area. So, as I say, the Turks had control of this area. And in the 1700s, I think it was 1782 or 3, a guy called Potemkin, and he was the sort of boyfriend, lover of Catherine the Great. And who is Catherine the Great? Well, she was the Empress of the Russian Empire. She was a German princess, but anyway, she was the Empress of Russia. And she had a sort of thing with this guy called Gregory, I think that was his first name, Gregory Potemkin. I believe there's an Admiral Potemkin aircraft carrier. I'm not 100% sure on that, in the Russian fleet. But she wanted access to the sea and through this area here into the Med, you know. And he managed, because at the time the Russian Empire was always having problems with the Ottoman Empire, the Turks, and they defeated the Turks in quite a few battles, and ultimately he took over this area here and he annexed the Crimea. So not long after that, the Russian Navy, Black Sea Fleet, was formed, and that started to grow, etc., etc. And in 1853 or 54, the Black Sea, long after the death of Catherine, a new emperor had taken power, and he wanted to sort of flex his muscles, and he mistakenly sent his fleet out via this area here. This is the entry point. There's a very small channel here. He sent his fleet out, and they attacked the Italian fleet and destroyed the Italian fleet. But in doing that, he aggravated the British Empire and the French Empire. And remember that the British Empire was massive, and it was going about the world, raping and pillaging the resources of every country that it came across. It had an amazingly powerful navy. You know, one ship could turn up and it would have maybe 100 cannons on the side of it, and it would come up alongside here and start firing at Sevastopol. And in fact, as a result of that conflagration with the Italians, the French and the British declared war on Russia, and they entered the Black Sea. They landed, invaded the Crimea, and so began the Crimea War. So when Britain or Boris Johnson or any of the rest stand up and start talking to anybody about you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that, remember this history. And the history is we landed troops on the Crimea. It's nothing to do with us, is it? But we knew that that was the control for their fleet. All right? Just like the Americans did. It was just a repeat of history. When the Americans arranged the coup here, they were looking at this peninsula as being what they were after. And when the British invaded it in 1853 with the French and the Turks, they were thinking the same thing. You know, there's always a bit of history to remember in these things. So, the Brits land here, around about here on the beaches, and they actually besieged Sevastopol for over a year. And the people of Sevastopol and the artillery officers and the civilians kept repairing the walls, and thousands of French and British troops were killed. In fact, the British from the beaches built a railway line so they could take the armaments, the cannonballs all the way up. So they were bringing their ships in here and they were sending ammunition up constantly, whereas Sevastopol was cut off. The British cut them off from here, right? So that they could no longer be supplied with food or ammunition. They would pick up the balls of the shots that had been fired at them and fire them back at the British. One fun fact about Sevastopol people might not know about, and in those times, I don't know how many of you have read a book called War and Peace. You've probably no doubt heard of it. It was written by someone very famous, and his name is Tolstoy. And he served at that time in 1854 in Sevastopol. I believe he was a lieutenant in the artillery. I don't think he was cavalry, I think he was artillery. And he would write short stories. That's how he started out. He would write short stories, and that's how the rest of Russia got to find out about what was happening, amongst other reports, in Sevastopol. Anyway, to cut a long story short, various things happened in Crimea. No doubt you've heard of the charge of the Light Brigade.
Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600.
Does that ring any bells? Right, that was, an incident, they like to say, in the fog of war. That's a situation where British cavalry were massacred. Well, how did that happen? Well, just like today, mistakes are made in the battlefield. And this particular mistake was that the Russians had captured, or were in the process of capturing, some Turkish artillery pieces. When a commander, or the commander in the British forces noticed that, and he sent word to the Light Brigade, the commanders in the Light Brigade, and says, attack them, stop them running away with the cannons. But somehow that was mixed up, and instead of going left to get the cannons, he went right and charged right. Or it could have been vice versa, it doesn't really matter, does it? But he charged into fully set up Russian cannons, and they were massacred. And these things happen in war. It'll not be the first time you've heard about, the best laid plans gone wrong. They practice the battle, they rehearse the battle, the battle starts, and halfway there a helicopter crashes and kills 50 guys. Then they arrive, they all get there, they all get into position. One unit finds that their radios don't work, they can't contact the other section. Another section suddenly comes upon a wee boy with 50 sheep. And he sees them. These things happen. That's called the fog of war. But in that particular one, it's famous. the charge of the Light Brigade, right? Famous people wrote different things about it. I'm not going to go into it. But that's the history of Crimea. That's the importance of Crimea, right? And people should understand that before they listen to the Daily Record or the Sun saying, hey, annex Crimea, that's terrible. It's not terrible, it makes sense. When you see the lay of the land, when you see the terrain, you understand the strategic significance of access to the Mediterranean and out here into the Atlantic. You know, I think it's helpful to look at the history, and in the next one I'm going to focus on Ukraine, and over here in this area, this is the Donbass, Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics that's very much in the news right now. But in the meantime, I'm just going to call it a day. I hope I've not bored you too much, but as I say, it's good to see the geography and try and understand what's at play here. Don't believe the propaganda. You know, if you think the UK can take on that there, then you're sadly mistaken. If you think NATO can take on that there, you're sadly mistaken. Remember, the Russians lost between 28 and 32 million. So they view, and that was because people of this area came straight in here and attacked them. They didn't attack us, we attacked them, i.e. the Germans, and us in the Crimea. So, don't throw stones at glass houses. Is that the saying? I always get these things wrong. Anyway, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, if you like the content, please hit the like button. It's very important you hit the like button, and share and subscribe, because that's all I've got to say about that. Peace out.
How dare you!